Hi, and welcome to Mrs. Pam Reads. We're continuing in the Magic Circle by Katherine Neville. In our last video, we concluded Friday and entered Saturday. And during that time, Miriam anointed the master as the king of his kingdom, not Judea, he said. And people were angry and appalled that a woman had done that. And then a man went to Caiaphas in the middle of the night and offered to betray someone. Oh, sorry, I bumped the table. For 30 pieces of silver. And that has left us to Sunday. Tiberius Claudius Nero Caesar could see in the dark. Now, as he stood in the black night on the parapet, a night without moon or stars, he could still see clearly the clean lines and veins of his own strong hands resting on the parapet wall. His large dark eyes surveyed the sea. He could see out Whitecaps all the way to the Bay of Napoli, where the coastline lay in inky darkness. He had been able to do so practically since infancy, and was thus able to help his mother escape across meadows and mountains and through a raging forest fire that licked so close it singed her hair, when the troops of Gaius Octavian were pursuing her, trying to catch her so that Octavian could seduce her. Then Octavian became Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. So Tiberius's mother divorced his father, a quaestor, Quaestor, who had been commander of Julius Caesar's triumphant Alexandrian fleet, and she became Rome's first empress. That was Livia, a remarkable woman, key sponsor of the Pax Romana, honored by the Vestal Virgins and thought of as a treasure by nearly everyone in the empire. Herod Antipas built a city named for her up in Galilee, and it had been proposed several times that she receive the status of an immortal, as had been decreed for Augustus. But Livia, at last, was dead, and thanks to her, Tiberius was emperor, since, to further her son's ambition, she'd poisoned every legitimate heir standing between himself and the throne, including, it was privately rumored, even the divine Augustus. Or perhaps one should say, to further her ambitions, which had been plentiful. Tiberius wondered whether Livia, wherever she happened to be now, could also see in the dark. Interesting. He remembered when he'd stood here at this very spot only last year, through most of the night, awaiting the bonfires he'd arranged for them to light at Vesuvius on the mainland as soon as it was certain in Rome that Sejanus was dead. He smiled to himself, a bitter smile full of deep and unending hatred for the one who'd pretended to be his best and only friend, the one who had betrayed him in the end, just as all the others had done. It seemed 1,000 years ago that Tiberius had stood on that parapet of his first self-imposed exile in Rhodes, where he'd fled from his wife, Julia, Augustus's daughter, whom he'd been forced to divorce his beloved Vipsania to marry. Okay. Whew. The weak Augustus banished Julia herself and wrote to beg his son-in-law to return to Rome. An omen was seen, an eagle, a bird never previously sighted at Rhodes, perched on the roof of his house. By this, the astrologer Thrasyllus correctly predicted Tiberius would succeed to the throne. Tiberius believed that the world was ruled by fate, that destiny could be learned through astrology, omens, or the traditional methods of divination, reading bones or bowls. No, not bowls, bowels. Blech. Since our destinies were foredrawn, in vain were any supplications to the gods, appeasement by sacrifice or by the costly erection of public temples and monuments. Of no avail were doctors either. At the age of 74, having received no treatment or medication since the age of 30, Tiberius was as strong as a bull, well proportioned and handsome, with the skin tone of a young athlete. He could poke through a fresh, crisp apple with any finger of either hand. And it was claimed that in his military days in Germany, he'd actually killed a man that way. He had been indeed a great soldier and a statesman par excellence, at least at first. But those days were over. The omens had altered, and not in his favor. He could never return to Rome. Only a year before the Sejanus affair, Tiberius had attempted to sail up the Tiber, but his small pet snake, Claudia, whom he carried in his bosom and fed from his own hand, had been found one morning on the deck, half eaten by ants. And the omens said, "Beware the mob." Now he stood each night on this high cliff of his palace, on the overgrown rock, whose very history lay steeped in antiquity and mystery. It was named Capri, the goat. Some thought it was called for Pan, half man, half goat, fathered on a water nymph by the god Hermes. Others believed it was named for the constellation of Capricorn, a goat, for that rose, a goat that rose like a fish from the sea. Because I'm not up on my astrology. And some, he was sure, said it was named for a goat-like emperor in a rut, hoarding, blah, 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 blah. He didn't care what they said. We're not going to talk about what he was doing. The stars that guided his destiny had still been the same at his birth. There was no changing that. Though Tiberius had been lawyer, soldier, statesman, emperor, he was, like his nephew Claudius, in his heart of hearts, a lover of history. In the case of Tiberius, especially the history of the gods, which most in these modern times regarded as myth. Best of all, he loved the tales of the Greeks. And now, after all these years of exile on this pile of stones, years when he'd heard a little but tragedy and betrayal in the day-to-day affairs of the outside world, now, suddenly, a new myth had surfaced at the far edge of the Roman Empire. It wasn't really a new tale, as Tiberius knew. Rather, it was a story of great antiquity, perhaps indeed the oldest myth in the world, and was found in each civilization since the dawn of recorded history. It was the myth of the dying God, a God who makes the ultimate sacrifice to become immortal, a God who, through the surrender of his own life as a mortal being, brings about the destruction of an old order and its rebirth as a new world order, a new eon. As Tiberius stood listening to the dark sea breaking against the rocks below, he looked across the dim, glowing outline of Vesuvius, where hot lava had churned and boiled from time immemorial. Though it only erupted, so they said, one time at the end of each eon. But they were not entering a new age now. Was this not the new eon the astrologers had been awaiting? Tiberius wondered if he himself would live to see the force of the Vulcan god, the Vulcan god unleashed from the belly of the earth. Oh, volcano Vulcan. I'm thinking Star Trek. Vulcan god. Okay, unleashed from the belly of the earth. Soon now, the one time it would happen between the past and future eons of 2 millennia each. Only once in a span of 4,000 years. Just then, near the breakers at the mainland, he saw the flash of an oar, which must be the ship he was awaiting. He'd been watching half the night, and now, as it approached in the thinning darkness that spoke of imminent dawn, he gripped the wall before him. It was the ship bringing the witness to him, the witness who had been present at the death of the god. All right, let's check our time. 12 minutes. Let me take a quick peek at the next stopping spot. Oh yeah, we'll finish it. Okay. So this guy, right? He was tall and slender with olive skin, almond eyes, and hair like a raven's wing that hung in a straight glassy panel to his shoulders. He wore a white linen tunic, wrapped once and cinched loosely with a rope belt, and the bronze arm cuffs, traditional with those from the south. Before him, across the terrace, Tiberius sat on his marble throne on an elevated marble dais overlooking the sea. Behind the man stood the imperial guard and the captain and crew who'd brought him there by sea. As he crossed the terrace and knelt on one knee before Tiberius, it was clear that he was afraid, but proud. Your name is Tammuz. You are Egyptian, said the emperor, bidding the other to rise from his knee. And yet, they say you are a pilot of a merchant ship that plies between Judea and Rome. When the witness stood in silence, Tiberius added, "You may speak." "It is just as your excellency, your imperial excellency states," Tammuz replied. "My master owns a fleet of merchant sailing ships. I pilot one of his ships that carries not only freight, but also many passengers. Tell me what you saw in your own words." "Take your time." "It was late one night after dinner," said the Egyptian Tammuz. "No one was sleeping. Most passengers were talking on deck and finishing their after-dinner wine. We were just along the coast of Roman Greece, near the Echelides Islands. The wind had dropped, and the ship now drifted near the darkly forested outline of the camel-humped double isles of Paxi. Just then, a deep voice floated out across the waters, a voice from Paxi, calling my name. "The name of Tammuz," murmured the emperor, as if recalling some half-forgotten melody. "Yes, my lord," replied Tammuz. "At first, I was distracted, steering the ship, and did not realize at once that it was I who had been called. But upon the second call, I was surprised, for no living soul on that small Greek isle knew me, nor did even the ship's passengers themselves know my name. By the third time my name was called, The passengers were looking about them, for ours was the only ship at all in this part of the dark sea. Therefore, collecting myself, upon the third call of my name, I replied to the hidden voice that called out to me across the waters. And what happened once you'd answered? Asked Tiberius, turning his face away from the first dawn light toward the shadow. So the sailors and guards standing nearby couldn't read his thoughts when he heard the Egyptian's reply. Thamus said, the caller cried out, Thamus, when you come opposite to Polodes on the mainland, announce that great Pan is dead. Tiberius leapt to his feet, his height towering over all, and he looked Thamus in the eye. Pan? He snapped. Which Pan are you speaking of? My lord, he is not one of the Egyptian deities, those in whom I was raised to believe. And though now, as a resident of the great Roman Empire, I have done those pagan ideas, I fear that I am not well schooled in my newly adopted faith. But it is my understanding that this Lord Pan is the half-divine son of God named Hermes, whom in Egypt we call Thoth. And therefore, as a half-divine, perhaps the Lord Pan is available to death. I hope I do not commit a sacrilege by saying so. Available to death, thought Tiberius, greatest god in thousands of years? What kind of absurd tale was this? With a mask-like face, he rubbed his jaw as if nothing were unusual, resumed his seat, and nodded for Thamus to continue, though he felt the first tingling presentiment that something might be very, very wrong. The passengers and crew were as astounded and confused as I. Thamus went on. We debated among ourselves whether I should do as the voice had demanded, or whether I should refuse to be involved in this strange request. At last, I resolved the problem thus. If, when we passed Polodes, a breeze was blowing, we would sail on by and do nothing. But if the sea was smooth with no wind, I'd announce aloud what I had been told. When at last we came opposite Polodes, there was no wind and a smooth sea. So I called out, Great Pan is dead. And then, said Tiberius, leaning out from his shadow to look the pilot in the eye. At once there was an outcry from the mainland, said Thamus. Many voices weeping, lamenting, and many loud wailings of amazement and astonishment. My lord, it seemed as if the whole coastline and the deep interior beyond were mourning at some hideous family tragedy. They cried out that it was the end of the world, that it was the death of the sacred goat. Impossible. Tiberius nearly screamed aloud as he heard those phantom cries in the darkness echoing through his mind. It was completely mad. The first soothsayer had cast the first lot for Rome's fate in the time of Remus and Romulus, who were raised by wolves, as was also prophesied. From that age down to the present moment, no dark event such as this had ever hinted at by anyone. Tiberius felt his skin cold and clammy, despite the warmth of the morning sun. Wasn't this era merely the dawning of the Roman Empire, which, after all, had just begun with Augustus? Everyone knew the dying god was a god in name only, for the gods themselves could never actually die. A surrogate was chosen, a new god, to regenerate the old myth. This time, it was a poor shepherd, farmer, or fisherman, someone who drove a wagon or a plow, not one of the most ancient, powerful gods. Phrygia, Greece, and Rome. The great civilization of Rome suckled at the teats of a she-wolf who would not be brought down by one old, airless hermit king, ending his days in exile on an isle named for a goat. No, it must be a lie, a trick launched by one of his many enemies. Even the name of the pilot himself, Tamus, smacked of myth, for this was the name of the oldest god who died, older than Orpheus, Adonis, or Osiris. The emperor drew himself together, signaled for the guard to give the pilot some silver for his trouble, and turned away to signify that the audience was ended. But as the money was handed to Tamus, Tiberius added, "Pilot, with so many passengers on your ship, there must be other witnesses available to confirm this strange story." "Indeed, my lord," agreed Tamus. "There were many witnesses to what I heard and did." Deep in the unfathomable black eyes, Tiberius thought he saw a strange light. "Regardless of what we believe we know," Tamus continued, "there is one witness alone who can tell us whether the great Pan was a mortal or a god, and whether he is alive or dead. But that sole witness is only a voice calling across the waters." Tiberius waved him away impatiently and departed for the isolated parapet, his prison. But as he watched the pilot being led down the slope to the harbor, the emperor called his slave and handed him a gold coin, motioning towards the Egyptian on the trail below. On swift feet, the slave descended the trail and handed the coin to the pilot, who looked up at the terrace where Tiberius stood. The emperor turned away without a sign and went into his empty quarters in the palace. Once there, he poured aromatic oil into an amphora on his altar and set it alight in service to the gods. He knew he must find the voice crying in the wilderness. He must find it before he died, or Rome itself would be destroyed. Ooh. And that's where we're going to stop for today. That's the end of that section. Interesting. All right, you guys. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Oh, hey, remember, let me find my little sign. Remember that you want to go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And that way, there it is. When you subscribe, you hit the bell tab, and that way you'll get a notification every time a new video posts, so you can hear what's going to happen next in our story, The Magic Circle. All right, you guys, have a great day. See you next time. Bye.